Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Association final Newsmaker Luncheon for 2010. My name is Steve Marshall and I'm the President of the FCA and also Australia Correspondent for Television New Zealand. I wish to extend a very warm welcome to our guest speakers here today. Sydney Theatre Company Artistic Directors since 2008, Cate Blanchett and Andrew Upton. And Sydney Theatre Company General Manager Patrick McIntyre. They're doing truly fantastic things both on and off the stage. Thank you very much for taking the time out to be here today. I wish to extend another warm welcome to the Canadian Consulate General, Tom MacDonald, New Zealand Consulate General, Martin Welsh, Swiss Consulate General, Marcus Millie, Jennifer Allen, Deputy Director of DFAT, and it's great to see a strong representation from the British Consulate General's office as well. Welcome. We'll get on with the show. Our opening address today is from a man who has spent 20 years in the Australian arts sector. After 7 years of management with the Australian Ballet, he tiptoed across to join forces with Miss Blanchett and Mr. Upton at the Sydney Theatre Company. Would you please welcome Sydney Theatre Company General Manager, Mr. Patrick McIntyre.
Thanks very much, Steve. And firstly, I'd just like to say thanks to everyone for coming along to the wharf at a very busy time of the year and a very hot time of the year. And a big welcome to everybody on behalf of all of us at the company, at Sydney Theatre Company, to the members of the Foreign Correspondents Association. We're going to give you a bit of an insight, the three of us, into the company, how it operates, its history and its current focus over the next 20 minutes or so. I'm going to give a little overview, a potted history of the company and a snapshot of where we are now. Andrew will talk about the 2011 artistic program, and then Cate is going to tell you about one of our major recent strategic projects, the Greening the Wharf program. Firstly, Sydney Theatre Company was founded in 1978 as the State Theatre Company of New South Wales. Since then, it's grown to play to around 300,000 people each year in Sydney, across New South Wales, nationally, and increasingly internationally. And in fact, in 2009, we sold over 400,000 tickets, and more than 100,000 of those were in the United States. Our four principal venues are Sydney Theatre across the road, which is an 880-seat venue. We have two venues here at our home, the Wharf, Wharf 1 and Wharf 2. Wharf 2 is our home of experimental theatre, and we also program into the drama theatre of the Sydney Opera House. But our home very much is here at the Wharf, and you can see why. It's a beautiful place to work. It was opened in December 1984, and it's an amazing case study not only in adaptive reuse of heritage architecture, but also the use of culture and the arts in rejuvenating urban space. The Walsh Bay precinct, where we are, is now home to many arts and commercial businesses, as well as a diverse residential population, restaurants and bars, and it's an area of town that's slated to continue to develop into the future, especially with the Barangaroo development gathering steam on one side of us, and once we have the promised light rail loop that will go from Wynyard Station all the way around in front of, through Walsh Bay in front of the wharf and around to Circular Quay, will be one of the key kind of linkages in the Sydney Harbour waterfront. It's actually exciting. Steve mentioned I've been here since March. I actually started my career at Sydney Theatre Company about 20 years ago, and at that point there was Sydney Theatre Company and Sydney Dance Company here, and the rest of it was barbed wire and kind of abandoned industrial infrastructure. So it's incredible just how far it's come in this amount of time. The company is fast becoming one of Australia's major artistic forces, developing artistic and allied creative talent. Many artists over the years of international stature, including Geoffrey Rush, Judy Davis, Tony Collette and Baz Luhrmann, have all spent formative periods of their careers here, as have, of course, our current artistic directors, actor Cate Blanchett and playwright-director Andrew Upton, and Hugo Weaving, Richard Roxburgh and Jackie Weaver. And Cate, Hugo, Richard and Jackie are currently performing together on stage across the road at Sydney Theatre in Uncle Vanya. Equally, the company has contributed to the careers of other kinds of arts leaders, including directors of other major arts organisations and festivals in Australia and around the world, including Michael Gow, Marion Potts, David Berthold and Brett Shee. One of the major commitments we've made in our new business plan is to be a development powerhouse. And I would say at the moment we do more than perhaps any other major arts organisation in Australia in the areas of new work commissioning, traineeships and creative development workshops. And also, under Cate and Andrew's direction, we're increasingly working with artists from other disciplines such as dance, fashion and visual art to help further develop the Australian theatrical voice. Over the years, many Australian arts organisations have developed very strong international followings, and they include organisations you probably know of like Australian Chamber Orchestra, the Australian Ballet and the contemporary Indigenous dance company Bangarra. And we at Sydney Theatre Company also strongly believe that international exchange is important for the arts ecology. It's important for audiences, especially in Sydney as a global city, to have access to the best from around the world. It's also important for artists to experience when they travel and perform elsewhere, and also when they work with international artists in our own market and our own culture, to experience different audience responses to Australian work and to experience different cultural contexts for their work generally. The company has had quite a history in international touring. Our first was to Hong Kong in 1983, and since then we've taken Australian theatrical works around the world, including to the West End, the Spoleto Festival, Radio City Music Hall, Edinburgh Festival and the prestigious Brooklyn Academy of Music. International exchange is again, it's something we talk about a lot, and especially since Cate and Andrew have been with the company, it's very much a hallmark of Sydney Theatre Company now as the leading Australian theatre organisation. And by that we mean not only exporting work around the world, but also inviting other companies and individual artists to collaborate with us. Right now, in fact, in Wharf 1, we're performing American playwright Sam Shepard's play True West, which is performed and created by an Australian actor and creative team, but directed by the American director Philip Seymour Hoffman. And across the street, Uncle Vanya is very much a kind of a case study in what we're talking about. It's an outstanding production of Chekhov's classic, directed by Hungarian Tamás Asher, who speaks no English, which was very interesting, with an Australian-European creative team and one of the most outstanding Australian casts ever to be brought together on stage. And the result, I don't know how many of you have been able to see it, is an intriguingly kind of placeless world created on stage that manages to be boisterous and bleak in a particularly Eastern European way, but at the same time being very sly and laconic, like only, I think, Australian art can be. Other recent tours of our productions overseas have met with high acclaim and also large audiences. Most recently, you may have heard that our production of the American icon, A Streetcar Named Desire, directed by Liv Ullmann, went to the States, and that was an example to mangle a figure of speech of successfully exporting Swedish-Australian coals to Newcastle. The season played to great reviews and full houses in New York City and Washington, and in Washington it won the Helen Hayes Award for the Best Non-Local Production for 2009. Just looking a bit more into the future, it was announced this week in the UK that Sydney Theatre Company will take a leading role in the Cultural Olympics in London in 2012. German playwright Boto Strauss's Gross and Klein, in a new English language adaptation by British playwright Martin Crimp, directed by the legendary Swiss-French opera and drama director Luc Bondy, and starring an Australian cast led by Cate, will be performed in London as part of a European tour also taking in Paris, Vienna and Recklinghausen. This ambitious project, which will premiere in Sydney in 2011, is the result of a 5-way international co-production and perfectly reflects the creativity, boldness and ambition of Sydney Theatre Company on the world stage today. The company is a $30 million enterprise, and only about 9% of that comes from public subsidy. Therefore, we are a non-profit business committed to artistic excellence and development, but we also must operate in a highly commercial and entrepreneurial fashion. The fact that we can do this and get away with it is a testament to the support and interest in our work shown by audiences and artists in Australia and increasingly around the world. So that's it from me. Thank you once again for coming. We look forward to continuing our engagement with the Foreign Correspondents Association. And we hope that we can work together to further genuine and productive cultural dialogue between the nations of the world. There is a lot the arts can do locally and internationally to achieve across boundaries more mutual understanding and respect, which in our highly and increasingly globalised society is growing in importance. And now to talk in more detail about 2011, I'd like to introduce our co-artistic director, Andrew Upton.
Good afternoon. I think I'd like to start with a kind of mission statement that we have formulated here, which I hope you will get the joke of. It's theatre without borders. Ha ha ha, very funny. No, well there you go, that's what it is. And what that means to us is to express theatre's formal breadth and invention to our audience as often and as lucidly as possible with our productions, our backstage work and our next stage work. And I think when we started, Cate and I, we were both quite interested to explore what makes drama. What is drama? And one of the recurring tropes, if you like, in all great drama is identity and the individual. It's no mistake that the greatest plays written are more often than not named solely after the lead character, Hamlet, Macbeth, Oedipus Rex. That is because what's placed on the cauldron of the stage is an identity or an individual. To that end, last year, or this year actually, although starting last year I think with Streetcar, we did an investigation, if you like, not holus bolus and not a directed investigation, but we threw open the possibility of looking at American drama. We looked at Streetcar, named as A Long Day's Journey into Night, August Osage County, Our Town, in a production of a play that is the most performed play in the English language and yet has never been done on a professional stage in Sydney. True West, which is currently on, and also we had the Oresteia, which may seem like an odd thing to throw into the mix, but actually it is about the individual and the family, as are all those plays. I think what surfaced in that look at American drama was that the individual is placed front and centre in American drama. The expression of individuality is given a credibility and a force that would suggest that individuality or the role of the individual is the most important way that a person can come into being in their life. Now this is especially seen as a creative fount. So it's interesting that that Long Day's Journey into Night, August Osage County and True West all place at their heart, and it's a vacant heart in August Osage County, a writer. Because I think the urge for self-expression is a very American thing, as we probably all agree, and that comes down to the placement of the individual as the most important source of change, growth, progress. This year, 2011, we're looking at a lot of European drama. It's mostly from the 20th century. It's sort of starting now, really, with Uncle Vanya. What I find interesting, and I could be wrong, is that European drama actually places the individual in society. The plays are about conformism, norms, outsiders. And there is in all of these plays, but in much of European drama, a fluidity and a transience about identity and the individual. There is a variability of truth and perspective. And in a lot of these plays, which I'm about to talk to you about, there is evidence the most important engine driving the play forward is actually the force of history, not the force of individual choice. So it's, there's a scale to the world which is not domestic and that asks questions about identity when placed on a grand scale. So to the plays. At the Sydney Theatre this year we're doing a production of The White Guard, which is one of the 6 plays that Mikhail Bulgakov wrote. Best known to us as a novelist and probably for his novel Master and Margarita. The White Guard is actually an adaptation by Mikhail Bulgakov of his own novel, The White Guard, which he adapted into a play called The Days of the Turbans, which I subsequently adapted into a play renamed The White Guard for the National Theatre, which was on this year. So we're remounting, we're not remounting, we're doing our own production of that. And it's a family drama, but it is very much about the force of history and the tide of change. It's set right on the kind of eve in what was a very messy revolution, but it's set in one day of the Russian Revolution. After that, at the Sydney Theatre, we've got the Threepenny Opera, which is a Bertolt Brecht play. This is a production that comes out of the Malthouse and has already been on. It was on this year. It's a terrific production with Eddie Perfect and Paul Capsis, among many others. Its musical director is Richard Gill, and its director is Michael Cantor, who was or is the outgoing artistic director of Malthouse. And that we're actually doing because we talked a couple of years ago with the Art Gallery of New South Wales, who towards the end of 2011 are doing a big exhibition called The Mad Square. That's what its title is at the moment. I don't know whether that's what its final title will be. And that is about art in the Weimar period in Germany. There's a lot of German work this year. And the Threepenny Opera, we hope, will talk to that exhibition at the Art Gallery of New South Wales for our shared, enthusiastic audience. Finally, in the Sydney Theatre, we're doing a production, as you heard, of Gross und Klein, or Big and Small, which is one of the seminal works of German post-war German theatre, and is to be directed by one of the great directors of post-war, one of the great post-war European directors, Luc Bondy, in an adaptation by Martin Krimp, who we consider to be the most significant of the younger generation of British writers. This play itself, right at its base, grapples with identity in the modern world and the fluidity, indeed, of identity and individuality. At the Drama Theatre, I'm not going to go through everything because it's a great program and I think you should choose what you like, but I'm actually going to concentrate on the European work because that's what I chose to talk about. We've got two things that I think are very interesting, Loot and No Man's Land, both classics of the British Empire in decline. And I think in them you can see changes that tear open a society, revealing the individuals inside in their confusion. They're both very comic, blackly comic. No Man's Land is particularly a long stream of gallows humour, really, about identity, memory, and a past that is constantly shifting and unpin-downable. Pinter, Nobel Prize winner, at his best. It's from his middle period, which is when he wrote, round about when he wrote Betrayal and Old Times, and they're all three plays concerned with time, the passing of time, memory and identity. It's a wonderful play. It's not been seen in Australia, and I think that is because, even though it was written in the early mid-70s, it was written very specifically for Rafe Richardson and John Gielgud, and it does take two great, fruity older actors of the theatre to bring to life the incredible playfulness of the dialogue. And I don't think Australia has actually generated such a wealth of experience really until now, and that can be seen in the casting of John Gayden and Peter Carroll, who are very old and fruity indeed. Fabulous actors, fabulous actors from our older generation. In Wharf 1, I think two that are really worth pointing out are Baal and Blood Wedding. Baal is another play by Bertolt Brecht, so you can see a lot of German work, and I think that's an interesting shifting plate in Europe. Baal is Brecht's first play and is a very, very wild, scathing look, as is Blood Wedding in a different way, at the problems individuals cause society, and indeed that society wreaks on those individuals. And they both erupt, interestingly, out of Europe as fascism is beginning to form and dominate, and that urge for individual domination seems to take over everyone's mind. Anyway, I will also point out there's a great deal of range and breadth in all that we do. There's Zebra, which is a new Australian work with Colin Friels and Brian Brown, which is actually about Australian identity in the light of our presence or our friendship with America. So when you program, you don't really want to squeeze everything down into one box, and I hope I haven't made it sound like it's a highly schematic process, because it's actually much more organic than that. But I do think it's interesting that those questions we ask get answered, or get, not answered, but get given various outlooks in the program. Back to Zebra, business and masculinity, and it's also about business and masculinity in the post-GFC world. Another great one we've got is Bloodland, which looks from the inside out at Indigenous Australia now. And there is in that the collision between traditional culture and the modern world, and the consequent fallout on the individual. What we are also about to start is to plan 2012. And what's interesting there, it seems to us, at this very early stage, is that a lot of the collaborations and the developments that we put in place when we came into the office in 2008 are beginning to come to fruition. So this appears to be more work that we've actually developed from the ground up on that slate, which is fabulous. But we will continue, we hope, to make work with international artists and for international touring, and of course, most importantly, work that is distinct and accessible for our audience. I didn't leave. Now I'd like to hand over to my co-artistic director and partner, Cate.
Thank you, sweetheart. So I'm here to talk to you today about the greening of the wharf, which is something that's very close to Andrew's my heart. Actually, one of the first announcements we made when we were appointed to the job by the board of the Sydney Theatre Company. So I think I'll start practically before I get ooga booga. Above our heads and running the length of, you can tell an actress has just taken the podium, the cameras start clicking. Running the length of the wharf is a solar array of 1906 state-of-the-art photovoltaic panels, and it makes it the second largest solar installation in Australia, and certainly the largest installation on a building in Sydney. And with the company at the STC now fully aware of the savings in electricity that can be made with best office practice, we've already reduced our daily consumption by about 10%. And together with these 1906 panels, we expect to soon deliver approximately about 70% of our required electricity. And we're currently researching and trialling the electricity reductions in new lighting technologies as well, which happen to come out of New Zealand. So we're glad that New Zealand is heavily represented today. These initiatives could see us at 100% of our energy needs in about 3 to 5 years. And by February 2011, a rainwater harvesting system will be up and running that will collect and store the runoff from the wharf in a brilliantly engineered storage device sitting underneath the wharf. And the water harvesting will supply 100% of our non-potable water needs, not just to the STC as a company, but to all the stakeholders on the wharf. I suppose the question on the lips of many in this room, and certainly on the lips of many journalists when we announced our desire to green the wharf, is what has any of this got to do with the making and producing and consuming of theatre? We feel that cultural institutions like the Sydney Theatre Company, significant flagships in an international city, must engage their audience in a complete way as possible. The experience can't just be about the shows that we put on, although of course that is central to what we do, but it must be about the whole encounter with the company, the environment and the ideas, and of course the other audience members. Climate change, we feel, is one of the biggest challenges facing the human race today, and it's our understanding that the reasons for its coming into being in the first place, possibly, and certainly its rapid acceleration as a byproduct, of course, of waste of energy and resources in our race to industrialisation. It's our feeling that those triggering reasons go to the very heart and state of our culture and civilisation today. Issues of waste and disrespect, reuse and reinvention versus the new, always the new. Prosperity and progress. At what cost? The immediate material satisfaction regardless of the chain of connection we all have to each other, the past and the planet, and that's just to name a few. In order to grapple with climate change and all that it means and calls into question profoundly and effectively, climate change must be engaged with not only just in material solutions and legislation, although let's face it, in support of a few material solutions and just the tiniest bit of legislation wouldn't go astray. We feel that climate change must be engaged in the vital organic cultural fabric that binds us and helps us make sense. Theatre has always been a great public forum for the exploration of fundamental human issues and challenges. It's inherently formed in dialogue between conflicting viewpoints, between audiences and artists, and indeed between individual audience members. We feel that the best drama is located not just in the heart of its characters, but in the heart of and the culture and the times in which they are written. The very heart of creative thinking in human endeavour at the moment, we believe, can be found in science and technology. The harnessing of solar power, which is evidenced on our roof, and of course in renewable resources, forms of energy generally, is at the forefront of physics and chemistry at the moment. It's also vital research for the energies of the future. And we feel that the marriage that this company and that this building proposes between arts and sciences, between the modern and heritage, between material and the aesthetic, can and should stimulate and engage our audiences and our city on many, many levels. We feel that the best outcome of all these initiatives would be positive, front-footed approaches to the challenges that face us all as a species, while continuing to offer up a good show, nice views behind the gauze curtain, and stimulating conversations between friends and strangers, and even on occasion between journalists. So thank you very much for coming. I think we're going to turn it over to a few questions. But before we do, I must say on behalf of Andrew and Patrick and myself, what an absolute privilege it is to be working in Sydney, particularly at the moment, but to be leading the company. It's an extraordinary group of people, and the greening of the building could not have happened without the buy-in of the company and also the federal and state government, private individuals, and of course the generous donation of the Sher Family Foundation, which was brought about through an association with the University of New South Wales. It's been incredibly rapid, the greening of the building. We really did think it would take a decade, and here we are 3 years in, and it's already a reality. So with what's going on in Mexico at the moment, it gives us great hope that there's a will and a way. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Kate, Andrew and Patrick. We're going to open the floor up to questions now. There is 2 roaming microphones.
This is a question for Kate, and I'm sure you have been asked this one many times. I mean, what is your priority between stage and cinema, and how do you bring the balance between the two?
I prefer that question to what am I wearing, so I will answer that one. We had Stephen, in our first season, we had Steven Soderbergh directing a new work, a hybrid work with a lot of video, live actors on stage. We had Liv Ullmann directing a play, an artist who herself has worked across the boundaries between theatre and cinema. And Patrick came from the ballet. Certainly we don't see them as being exclusive. On a personal level, it's a very large company with a very great responsibility, and it has been singularly, I think, the most challenging thing either of us have done in our personal careers. So the time to make films, personally, is very... It's a very small window. There's so much to be achieved here, and it's been all-consuming. But in terms of the intersection between those art forms, we don't see that there's a boundary. Theatre without borders, film without borders. It's, I think, personally, hopefully I've become a better stage actor through experience in film and vice versa, hopefully.
My name is Sonja Dörnitz, and I'm a freelance journalist. Every year in May, the Sydney Writers' Festival is held in these premises. Just wondering, what is the cooperation like, and what are your plans for the future?
We try to cooperate with everybody in this precinct as much as possible. This year, for instance, as you noted, we actually gave them, we programmed 2 weeks for Wharf 1 and Wharf 2 to be vacant for them to use, which we couldn't actually do this year, in 2011. But we gave them notice of that, and they're aware of that. We are trying to open up as much of our spaces to them as we can. I think the Sydney Writers' Festival, of all of the precinct activities that currently happen here, is the most exciting week for the precinct in the year. And we're very encouraging of them being here, and of them, when Pier 2-3 becomes a dedicated arts space, as it must, instead of an empty building, then we'll be holding hands with them all the way to the finish line.
Hi, I'd like to ask you about the greening of the wharf program and how it fits more broadly into the issue of climate change. So 2 years ago we had an emissions trading scheme on the table in Australia, and now things seem to be so different to what it was. How does your program fit into, does the greening of the wharf sort of fit into your ideas of what Australia should be like in the future, and how do you feel about this sort of new political paradigm that we have?
Well, it is an interesting question. I think, to start with the practical, what we're stunned by, I think, as I began to mention, is how possible it is, and how quickly it has happened, and that it was made possible by a unique partnership, private philanthropists, government, and in-kind support from the business sector. And we have, I think, so it's what's possible, and the technology is, a lot of this renewable, sustainable technology is being driven out of Australia, and I suppose the operative word being driven out of Australia. And Dr. Sher was educated at the University of New South Wales, but yet he started up his business in China, and now he's one of the largest producers of PV cells, and it became possible really because of his desire to give back to the city in which he was educated. So that's a positive thing, but also there's a downside to it. I think for us, one of the great inadverted things about the greening of the wharf is that we have an audience space of about 300,000 people a year, and 30,000 of which of those are students. So a large part of what we're going to do will be to disseminate the power of which is, if any of you do get to go up, it's a very, don't be frightened, if you're frightened of heights, it's a dip in a roof, you're perfectly safe, great view of the city, but it's a very majestic display, and I think that to get students to experience that is a very powerful thing. We've had a close association with ACF, who've been great mentors in, and helping us get into an interesting network of like-minded people. We've got the Wentworth talks of the Wentworth group of concerned scientists about once a month. So it's not just the PV array. It's also spreading the sphere of influence, and I suppose it's about doing what you can do, and we don't see ourselves as operating individually in this. It's only the beginning, and there's many more things that we can be doing as a company, but we have had buy-in from both state and federal governments, and so that gives us cause for hope. Yes, please.
There are three main streams to the greening project. One is the infrastructure, a second is an advocacy stream, and a third is a behavioural change stream. And we've actually accomplished a lot even before the PV was switched on, just by metering usage and noting where usage happens and managing consumption in that way. The advocacy program is really interesting, and you kind of mentioned the politics of it. I think a lot of people are really hungry for more information to kind of understand the science of it, but the politics of it is just as thorny an issue. And on the advocacy side, as Cate said, we've had a series of scientific talks here that have been getting 300 people on a Monday night to come into the theatre just to hear scientists talk about the issues. And last week, or the week before last, we had a panel discussion, which will be on ABC television later, where things like the emissions trading scheme, price on carbon, were debated in really interesting terms. So there was one point of view saying we should incentivise the bringing down of the cost of renewables versus the other kind of philosophical approach, which is to increase the pricing of carbon, both of which are outcomes to make the price, use price as a mechanism to encourage renewable energy, but they both come at it from either drive up the cost of one or bring down the cost of the other. So the kind of politics of it, again, it was a full house of people, and I think it will provoke a lot of debate when it's screened on television. It's just such a kind of, there's a demand for information that you can't quite get from the newspaper or from your own research on the internet, and that's why theatres is a place where people come together to talk and engage with ideas. That's how we can really use the medium of theatre to plug into more kind of factual and exploratory discussion.
Okay, thank you for your inspiring speech. May I ask you, in your opinion, what do you think about the practical actions can be taken to address the climate change?
Well, I was incredibly hopeful, I think, like everyone, before Copenhagen, and I think we're all much more realistic. But I suppose, in a nutshell, there's an opportunity in climate change, I think, for a reassessment of our personal values, but there's also an enormous, as there was after 9/11, an enormous opportunity for leadership. Bit of a vacuum at the moment.
Hi, Celine Teo, Singapore Press Holdings. To those internationally who are looking to take a lead from what STC has done with the greening of the wharf, what are some of the barriers that you came up against, and how do you surmount it? And, did they come from quite unexpected places? Because it sounds like you've had quite a lot of help from unexpected places.
Actually, there were surprisingly few barriers. So I think one of the first barriers to overcome, if you're in the mood, is that there are actually less barriers than you think. One of the ones we thought was going to be massive was heritage. And we looked very closely at it, and of course we have a great deal of respect for this building and its place in the whole landscape around here. And we had it looked at very closely, and actually this was always it's considered a working place, and this is always a working roof, and originally it was black, interestingly enough. So there was a strange argument for having the panels just in that strange, odd heritage, sort of going back to its original purpose. It's a more functional roof and it's the same colour as it was. But more importantly than that, we found there was a lot of support in all areas, both private and in government, to make adaptive reuse work. So there was a lot of interest in using it as an experiment, I think, by the state government, by the city, by the heritage architects, by the engineers. Everyone, it sort of garnered more support than any obstacles that I remember encountering. And I think that's probably why it happened so quickly. The only other obstacle, of course, is price. We're in a good position because we're a public institution that could submit to the government to cover it, for the shortfall. And we did have a massive help from the Sher Family Foundation in that wanting to give back to the city. But I think obviously as more is done, the price comes down as well. So it's not really a barrier, it's a thing you just have to push through. Anyone else?
We see movie stars lending their names to different causes. George Clooney, Angelina Jolie. Would you lend your face to this particular cause in more depth or detail?
I work quite often with the Australian Conservation Foundation, but we've got to remember that running a theatre company is not a charity. It's of great cultural significance, and it's something that every city deserves, is to have a vibrant cultural life. So if you mean specifically to the greening as opposed to... Sometimes in Australia it does feel that you are running a charity when you run a theatre company, given the relationship to government support. But we're not here to whinge, that's just a reality. And I suppose the wonderful thing in Sydney is that perhaps a lot of our cultural institutions have atrophied because of a lack of cohesion, shall we say, in the government buy-in. But there's an incredible groundswell going on in Sydney at the moment. So that takes up a lot of my personal time. But yes, absolutely, as a parent, as a citizen, and just as a human being, I think that the climate change is something that is I don't see what else you would do with your time if you had any spare time.
Prashant Shanmugam, United Nations Global Atlas on Human Rights. I understand this is called greening of the wharf. When is it going to be called greening of the wharves? What do your neighbours think of your initiatives, and are they going to replicate the best practice?
I suppose greening the wharf is a kind of a handy tag to start off with. We are trying to green the world through the advocacy programs. We bring so many people through our theatres every year, and we're trying to, through notes in programs and through online messaging, to kind of spread practical messages about greening individuals' homes. But interestingly, there's an organisation locally called the Walsh Bay Partnership, which represents the interests of the residential community here and the businesses. And initially there was some kind of resistance. We had to have kind of community forums about, would there be reflection at what times of the day, that type of thing. And having resolved all of that, there has actually been more of an appetite now from local kind of building, strata plans and stuff to be more environmentally aware. And that's why also the harmony with Barangaroo being billed as a green development, it kind of adds, it will make this whole kind of waterfront like a kind of a best practice green zone. Interestingly, Museum of Contemporary Art is building a new wing, and they're also in theatre, lighting is one of the things that chews power. In visual art, it's the fact that you have to have constant temperature and humidity for artworks, which is the thing that chews power in an art gallery. So they're looking at, with their new building, as well as recycling the old building, they're looking at using water, heat exchange, things using the harbour to bring down the consumption of power to maintain the artworks. So it is something that we're doing. In London, there's a group called, is it Patricia's Bicycle? I can never remember the name. Somebody's Bicycle, which is a collection of arts organisations that are beginning to get together to share information on this topic, and that's one of the things that we're hoping to come together with other Australian arts organisations as well. So it's kind of building, industry, precinct, and then eventually world.
Thank you, Patrick. Ladies and gentlemen, Cate Blanchett, Andrew Upton, and Patrick McIntyre.